Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on diversity and inclusion, expelling myths and exploiting opportunities. This is the first of a series of webinars that we'll be having quarterly, where we hope to engage you in conversations that are real and relevant about topics that are of interest. The next one will be targeted in February 2024. But I'm delighted today to be joined by two expert panellists. We have Carolyn Stebbings from RAPP, who's the Chief Operating Officer and Inclusion Officer. And we also have Anna Watson from Freshwave, who I'll be talking with about this topic, and she's the Technical Delivery Director. In terms of the discussion today, please feel free to ask questions throughout the session. You can do that by simply typing a question into the chat function, and we'd really encourage you to do that, and we promise to endeavour to answer as many of those questions as we can during the next hour. So in order to get this discussion underway, I wanted to start by asking you, Carolyn, what does diversity really mean? What's the definition of diversity?
I think it's a really great question, Sandy. Thank you very much for asking. And just to say for everybody out there, I'm not a DE&I expert. As with everybody, I'm on a journey too. But I think the thing with diversity is that I would never use that on its own, because at the end of the day, we're all diverse. We all have individual characteristics that make us us, and that's not diminishing those from protected characteristics. My frustration comes from the fact that diversity tends to really relate or be talked about a lot as a tick box exercise, relate to race and gender, and it's so much more than that. It's intergenerational, it's neurodiversity, it's sexual orientation. So for me, it's the E, it's the equity in the middle of D and I that is coming more to the fore, and I think over the next year or so we'll see that more, because that's equity for everybody, and it's in making sure that we've got the right structures in place, be that pay, be that resources, be that situation, and that values everybody's experience. And then inclusion for me is putting everybody on an equal footing, so ensuring that we recognise those people from, let's stick with the diverse characteristics groups, and making sure that they are included along with everybody else. But everybody is treated fairly, equally, whether they are a new job starter or they've been in their job for the last 40 years.
That's a fantastic addition of thinking of equity, because even from my own personal perspective, I often think of diversity and inclusion. I think that notion of equity and not alienating any of the talent pool is really important. And I think bringing together these concepts of representation but also connectedness is really important. Anna, from your perspective, how have you been able to, in your organisation, what does diversity mean? How do you embrace that within your organisation?
So I think it's similar to what we've already talked about. It's about making sure that everyone feels included. And at whatever level of expertise, experience, whether they've been in the organisation for a long time or a short time, it's about making sure that everyone feels that they can work together to deliver great outcomes. And by being a team and feeling included, you feel like you're empowered to get stuff done. And the more you can do that together, I think you get far better results.
Fantastic. And I know today it's been really interesting, because obviously you're working in a relatively smaller organisation, although I know you've both had experience both in small and large. It'd be interesting to develop that theme as we go through. Taking that concept of diversity, we often hear about diversity as helping us be more future focused. What does that really mean? How can diversity help us to evolve organisations to being the kind of organisations we want to work in?
I don't know if it's about being more future focused, but I think it's absolutely imperative that when we look at the people that we're employing, the cultures that we're developing, that we're building in a sense of belonging. So wherever you come from, you feel like you've got a sense of belonging, and that we create an environment that fosters or supports change and challenge. You know, I'm quite old. And when I grew up, you started in a corporate or a smaller organisation, you were told what to do and you didn't question it. I'm a little bit more on the front foot and would question it and sort of would be reprimanded for being curious. Whereas I think that future-facing thing around diversity is bring it on. being curious is good, because I think, and I hope Anna agrees, is that actually diverse teams, curiosity, asking why, means that we get better results at the end of the day, because we're not being led by our unconscious bias.
And never accepting that the way things have always been done is the way that we'll continue to do things. So my team, they all have an objective to make change. So if they spot a problem or they think a process doesn't work together to change it and challenge the status quo, and don't accept that the old way is the only way. And I think that is linked to what you were saying. Embrace change, make things happen, drive different cultures, different behaviours, different ways of thinking, could end up in a much more efficient way of working or an improved process.
And don't get me wrong, I think the thing there is that you need psychological safety, don't you? So if you've got an environment where people aren't afraid to say, actually there's a better way of doing this, can we explore it? But that comes from psychological safety, and that's another sort of buzz term that you hear of a lot, but that really does resonate with the people that work for me, is that sometimes they feel like they can't say or they shouldn't say, but actually if they did, it would be all the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that whole notion of including people, so it's not just a buzzword, just the next thing we're talking about, but actually that we're taking action. So that perhaps leads us nicely into actually thinking about some of the myths that do exist around this topic. If we've established what we mean by diversity and inclusion, and that lovely extra term of equity, and making sure everybody has a voice, let's try and think about some of the myths that exist. And Caroline, I was going to start with, Anna, rather, I was going to start with you. That one of the things that I hear said is, well, there's too many barriers, it's too hard to do things. From your experience, have you got any examples of things which show it may be hard, but there are ways that we can do this?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of people think that you have to have a technical background to deliver to be a project manager, or to deliver an IT project or an infrastructure project or whatever. But actually, the role of a project manager is about orchestrating and bringing a team together and being able to logically figure out what are the tasks that need to be done in what order and how do I build my plan. Now, I have a background in music and English. I read music and English at Durham, and I ended up in an IT project management role when I left university. I had no technical background at all, but actually I recognised that I really liked organising things. I liked to be in control, and I liked to plan. So actually those skills can move into any kind of project management role. So a lot of people always have this fear that they think, I'm not technical, I don't understand the detail, but actually the project manager's role is to coordinate the team. And you've probably got a technical lead or an engineer on your team that knows the technical stuff, and actually your role is about leading and managing that project. So hopefully there may be some people listening that think, oh, I don't have the confidence because I can't do the technical bit. You don't have to be technical to be a delivery lead or a project manager.
No, so
I'd like to build on that a little bit as well. Coming from a marketing services environment, we have almost like that full spectrum of project management, from those really technical people all the way through to project managers that are running more creative elements that don't involve a platform or development. They might be delivering some digital ads, they might be working on some creative campaign work, but it is that point of they are good organisers. They're people that can see the rational and the emotional. They're the ones that, oh, I love that, orchestrating a team, because I can see the project manager being able to say, let's mix this up a bit. There's that new starter person that's sitting over there. You know, let's bring them into the team, see if they can bring something new. Or there's that really super quiet person because they're more neurodivergent. Then let's bring them in, because I'm sure if we give them the time and space, they'll have something extra to add to that team. And I think that some project managers don't realise, if you like, the power they have to mix those really fantastic groups together.
And I love this idea of the fact that, you know, underpinning diversity is that there's real strength in it. Far from it being something that has to be seen as something to be feared or afraid of, that actually diversity can really help build teams that are highly credible. And I believe in your organisation, you actually have a line for almost creating teams that are diverse. I think it was stand up for individuality. Can you share a little bit about that and what that means in an organisation, how it helps to create those kind of diverse teams?
We've had stand up for individuality as our strapline, for want of a better expression, for about the last 5 years now. And I personally truly believe in it. When I meet new people, when I talk to them about what it's like to work at RAPP, I always say to them, I want you to bring your whole self. There is no such thing as a work-life balance anymore. It's just life. And therefore, if we know who the individual is and their ups and their downs, and they have that psychological safety, as I talked about earlier on, to say, this is what my life is like at the moment, it means that we can adjust and be around them. Now, is it easy? No. Do we struggle with it? Yes, sometimes we do. But we hope that we are constantly correcting ourselves and creating an environment that does allow that. And this is where I would probably say, for anybody out there wanting a hint or a tip, if you like, for me is there's always two sides to a story. So if someone's struggling, it might not be that they're not capable of doing the job, it might be something that's going on in their personal life. So don't just shut them down and say, oh, that person can't do that job, I'll swap them out for someone else. Try and dig a bit deeper, walk in that person's shoes, and you'll get a more balanced view of the situation that you've got there. So that for me is paramount. The other thing we do is we do hiring for new managers about inclusion and diversity, so that we do have people in the business that have worked for longer, that had different constructs. I've talked about myself and how I started my career, much more regimented. Now we want hiring managers to say, well, how do I, as we say, recruit for culture add rather than culture fit? Gone are the days where you cookie cutter fit the next person. You say, what can this person add to the business and add to our thinking moving forward? So that's our goal. As I say, we don't always get it perfect, but it is a journey. We're all on that journey together.
And I think linking to being and bringing yourself to work, I think it's really important that people feel that they're comfortable to say, I don't know how to do something, or I need to learn a little bit. Within our organisation, we put on quite a few lesson lunch and learn sessions, where we basically make people feel, even if they're an expert in something, they can help share and pass on information to the more less experienced people. But also we make it a conversation, so everyone can feel like they are in a safe environment, they can learn from each other. And even if you're an expert, you might have actually learnt from someone that's found something else in the process, or they've discovered something that no one knew about. So it's about sharing and being open about how you feel and how confident you are in doing your role. And I think if we allow people to be themselves and bring themselves to work and show maybe a little bit of vulnerability, that is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Anna, you and I talked, I think, a little bit about one of the things that's close to my heart is that intergenerational thing, and where youngsters that are coming in might come in as, let's say, we have the term digital native. I think it's like diversity natives. It's part of their language. They don't question. But it's great that they come in and then they've got older people to learn a skill from, but then they don't realise how powerful their role is in teaching those older generations to be more engaging, less judgmental, challenge their unconscious bias. And I think that's a really rich thing that we don't optimise enough.
And everyone can learn from each other. Whether you've got 25 years experience or whether you're at the early part of your career and you've only got 5 years experience, everyone can learn from each other is key.
And I think that's really nice when we're talking about this, because it stops us polarising things like, does it mean the older people have to move over? Does it mean the younger people need to take over? But it's a much nicer place when we think about collaborating in the space, the magic that happens when you bring those strengths together. So let's think about some of the other myths. We thought, that dispels, if you like, a myth that there's only one kind of age group that works. What about some of the other areas that maybe present barriers to people celebrating diversity. For example, sometimes we have to go the extra mile to accommodate perhaps people that are not the standard or the norm or have a different need. Have you got an example from your experience, Anna, where you've needed to do that in the interest of getting the best team that you can?
So I've got a really good example actually. I was running a big transformation program in an organisation that's been going on for 150 years, and they were very set in their ways. And I was this new program manager that had come in from outside the organisation and I had to spend a lot of time convincing them how to do things differently, and actually if you did it this way you're going to have a positive result. And a lot of the time I was dealing with people that had, got 40 years service, and they were used to working in a certain way, and they definitely weren't used to my language, they weren't used to my way of doing program management. They'd probably never done a program before. So trying to work with them to get them to understand why processes and people and technology change needed to happen was absolutely fundamental to making the program a success and getting them on board with what we were trying to do. And I think there's an absolutely brilliant book which my transformation director at the time, he recommended I read, and it's called A Peacock in the Land of Penguins. And it's absolutely bang on about how teams are different, how people are different, and how you have to adapt to different situations and scenarios and working with different people. So if anyone wants to read it, it will take you about 30-40 minutes to read. It's quite entertaining, and it gives you lots of hints and tips as to how to maybe adapt and how it's okay to be different.
Yeah, wonderful, and a great tip there as well with that book. So it's clear then that diversity has the ability to challenge the status quo, to help us open perspectives and perhaps not be afraid to try things differently. In your experience, Carolyn, how have you used in your organisation diversity to help challenge that status quo or to become more innovative perhaps?
I don't know as we would say we've actually sort of pinpointed diversity in that way, but we try where we can, as I said earlier on, standing up for individuality, culture add rather than culture fit. We've got diversity marketing so that every project should go through a team that challenges the status quo that you talk about, Anna, on why it might be done like this. Well, it can be done differently. What's to stop us from doing something differently? We have a whole raft of calendar of initiatives and events that go on to try and educate, going right to the top of this session where I said the thing that upsets me most about diversity is it pigeonholes, it labels people, and we're not one thing, we're multiple things, and therefore we've got to have that intersectionality across all of those. So we're running 2 or 3 events a month that people can lean into. It can help build awareness, it can build education. Anna, you talked about learning every day. I'm a great believer in that. We all love our comfort zone. There is, I don't know who coined it, but there's supposed to be a sphere of energy around us, and our core part is our comfort zone. That's where we feel most comfortable. And then comes the learning zone, and we should actually look to learn every day. The bit we fight against is the next zone, which is the risk zone. And for me, being a project manager is great because it's all about risk mitigation. But if you go through the learning, then you're more willing to give things a bit of a risk. And I think they're the sorts of things that we try to get our people to do, get our colleagues to challenge the status quo, get them to raise where they think something's not working. Again, not everything can be implemented. We're a big corporate, not got the nimbleness of Anna's organisation, but we do listen and we do try to adapt policies and ways of working where we can that then encompass everybody's attribute.
I think it's important for people to realise that feeling uncomfortable when they don't know something is actually okay. And really it's about my job and a number of other leaders in the organisation is to make them feel that if they do come up against something that they don't feel safe or confident about getting something done, or something's new where they've not got any experience, there are other people around them who should be able to help them get through that hurdle or that uncomfortable feeling. but the individual will definitely get something out of that uncomfortable feeling because they will have learnt something through it. They will have built their experience, they will have gained some knowledge about how to do something or how to engage with a stakeholder that they haven't been able to do before. So it's just, again, a bit like the myth link, being uncomfortable is okay.
Yeah,
I think that's really good because sorry, Sandy.
carry on.
I often say that it's good to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and if you put yourself in that zone, you're going to learn so much more. And a book, just to sort of play off your book as well, for me, that really I could see myself on a daily basis taking learnings from it, is a book called The Culture Map by Erin Mayer. She's a doctor in cultural psychology, and she talks about how different countries are and what their traits are, but we live in a melting pot where all of those things are with us every day, because particularly in the UK we have such a diverse society anyway. Is that knowing and understanding why someone might stay quiet until you ask them to engage isn't because they're naturally an introvert, it could be because it's their cultural norm to be like that. Yeah. And we can't assume everyone can be like us. So that's a really good read if anybody wants. A bit longer than your 40 minutes, I'm afraid, but really, really good.
And I think all of these points, and both that concept of being not needing to know everything and recognising the differences in the team, these are real strengths to a project manager, because in fact there's, I think, a lot of evidence to suggest, previous studies, that actually diverse teams actually genuinely add value to the bottom line. I think a recent McKinsey report found that in organisations that had diverse senior executive teams, that it actually added 19% more revenue across those organisations. So this idea of diverse teams being a real strength and generating real value is absolutely true.
If we were all the same, it would be so boring, and I would have this really bland team of every single project manager being the same. And actually what is brilliant about my team is that everyone is different. I've got different ages, I've got different sexes, and everyone brings something different to the whole team. And I think it's really important that we hire different types of people and different ages and different experiences, because everyone will get something out of everyone being different.
Absolutely. And building on that, because as we said, we don't want to polarise with diversity and inclusion, equity being only about thinking of gender and race. We need it to be more than that. And there are some challenges when we do that, because it requires us to go the extra mile, particularly if we're thinking about sometimes disability. From your experience, have there been any examples that you could draw on where you can show how you can be proactive to engage or include people that might have extra needs?
We've got an example at Freshwave where we have hired a young girl who is deaf, and she cannot hear at all. She can't use hearing aids. And I identified around a year and a half ago that we could create a role for her that she could perform without having to hear. So she receives all of her tasks over email and Microsoft Teams chat, and she conducts a whole load of project administrative activities for us, from raising purchase orders, receipting purchase orders, managing project finances, supporting us with pulling project status reports out of our tools and things. And all of those things she can do independently via instruction from the team. But to make sure that she does feel included, we use interpreters to come to our team meetings when we have company all-hands meetings, or when she has a one-to-one with her line manager. There's always an interpreter there so that she can feel that she is supported and included in the wider business context and activities.
That's fantastic. And Carolyn, from your experience, that's a great example of where sometimes we have to push through our initial view of something might be difficult to achieve a better end result. And I know sometimes our own bias or stereotypes can prevent us doing that, thinking that we know something's best for a certain role. How do you, in your organisation, try and encourage people to look at things differently, to perhaps, you talked about the culture add rather than the culture fit. What are some things you can do to really put that into practice, as it were, and make a difference?
I think it's a fear of repeating myself. It's giving people that psychological safe space to be able to challenge the norm and have those forums to talk about things. It's making sure that you've got open-minded people, you know, actually that diversity aspect, because it became such a popularised theme during COVID and post-COVID, it's turned into a bit of a tick box exercise, I think, for some organisations. That's the realm of the leadership or HR. But it's all of our responsibilities in my mind. Every individual needs to be seen to stand up for another person. Even if it's one person, that's how we'll start to make a change. And so I would always advocate that in the business. Is it easy for some people to stand up and say they want to make a change? Yes. Is it hard for some people? Yes. But if we keep giving them the forum to be able to say, this would be done better this way, we, on an individual basis, we want to try and bring in as many people from different groups as possible, and then we urge them to tell us in that interview process what do they need to create the best working experience for them. So we create quiet working spaces in the office, because we are in the office a couple of days a week, and then louder spaces for people that like louder, you know, headphones for people that want to be quiet, allowing people to work from home, because we know that developers, for example, or data scientists like to be quiet. Those people that are more neurodivergent, I mean, I don't like sound or music when I'm working. It distracts me. I couldn't be in that sort of environment. It's not the way that my mind works, so I can appreciate that, but I've got people around me that then appreciate that. Yeah. I think that's probably the biggest thing, is don't judge others by who you are, and if we can foster that sort of environment, we'll move forward. It will never be done, completed. It's a journey that we're on, and anyone that thinks it's a set of quotas or 10 boxes that need to be ticked isn't on the bus with us.
No, absolutely. I love that notion of a journey rather than a destination, which I think it will continue to be for the foreseeable. And I also, a point that you mentioned there is that this isn't just a senior executive responsibility, and it's not certainly not just an HR responsibility. It's too easy in some organisations to say, oh, HR look after that. Mm-hmm. This is about everyone taking personal responsibility, and that's a really strong message, I think. Is that something that you can relate to again in your organisation?
Yeah, it should be about everybody, and actually having been involved in this conversation today, and you know, meeting Carolyn and running up to today, it's made me think about, are we as an organisation doing enough? And actually, it shouldn't just be led from the top. It should be about everyone in my team should feel that, you know, we can make a change and a difference by thinking about things differently, and thinking about, you know, how can we improve or make an impact when we think about diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, and I think that's a lovely theme that, I mean, we've used the term today, psychological safety, a few times, and it's again bringing that back. We're all incumbent on doing that, thinking about the language that we use to include people, that what do we actually do in practice in meetings, how are we running our meetings, how are we ensuring people have a share of the voice. So let me just dwell on that point, because there's a kind of one of the myths I'd like to expel is the idea that language doesn't matter, and I would suggest that language does matter in this particular debate. From your experience, Carolyn, are there any examples you could bring on that help people to understand how the language we use either helps to create that safe space or otherwise?
That is a really interesting question and gritty question, because actually, again, it polarises people in so much as diversity, equity and inclusion is such a big topic now, but there'll be so many people that step away from it because they're fearful of the language they should or shouldn't use. They're fearful of being judged by using the wrong language. And then you'll have people on the receiving end of it because they happen to be a protected characteristic that then get hurt by language that's used inappropriately. I think we're still very much at that tipping point of understanding or creating some brave spaces that allow people to say, I know that you are different to me. I'd like to understand. I'm sorry, I might use the wrong language, but can you help me to use the right language, and not being fearful of that? Because the whole of my life, my grandfather always taught me was that it's only a human being. If you lean in, they will lean in too, and you will both become richer people for that, because you can speak openly. But you have to ask that permission. So from a language perspective, we would say ask permission first. And if something isn't going right, you need to empower people to say, I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm walking away from this, and give them the right structure to be able to report it if they want to report it, a safe space for them to go and talk about how they feel. So it's how are we using language? I want people to be open enough to ask the questions, feel brave enough to go on that journey, which is the other thing that we keep saying as well. Because without that, you're not going to get there. Do I have individual experiences? I'd be breaching probably GDPR and personal data on that basis. But yeah, it does happen. But I hope that people will raise situations and say, this has happened to me.
Yeah.
Can you help me?
Yeah. And language affects us in another way as well, doesn't it? Because actually maybe it provokes us to think about just some of the terminology we're using in workplaces and its relevance. For, an obvious one many of our learners may relate to is the use of a term apprentice as an apprenticeship programme, and sort of job titles that we use, and actually thinking about how we can evolve some of those titles to make things more inclusive. Are there any areas there that you've talked about or think about that might be worth dwelling on for a moment?
I think Anna's probably got a better example than I have, other than I do have one particular one. I love apprenticeships. I think they're an amazing thing. But also I'm very cognizant of that doesn't always mean you're 16 to 18. We've got a number of apprentices in our business that maybe want to swap roles, or they're on their third career and they're doing an apprenticeship. We've got a young woman who works for me who's in her 30s, who's come in as a junior PM in the old world, if you like. And the one thing she said was, I've got the qualifications, I really want to do this job, but I'm a mum, and calling me a junior, I think anyone that if I see a client is going to think, oh, she's going to be 21, and then they're going to see me. And it's like, okay, well, we'll get rid of the word junior then and just call you a project manager. And then in the background, you've got that capabilities matrix of you're at this stage and this is the career map that we're going on. But I think you've got similar.
So I think it's really important when you've got a delivery team that you've got a career path for people, so they're really, really clear about, I've got this much experience and this is where I want to get to, and you're going to have different levels of experience and capability, and it is a good thing to have roles and job titles defined that explain the sort of level that you're working at. But very recently I was having a conversation with someone who said, actually, customer facing, is it appropriate to use certain job titles like junior versus senior, etc., because perceptionally to the customer they might think, oh, well, that person doesn't know as much as someone else. So actually, from an internal point of view, should we use it from a levelling point of view? Yes. But should we think more differently about how that perception could be perceived externally to customers?
I mean, that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because it does, sometimes we can perceive a title like junior or senior stops people thinking about fit for purpose, are they the right person for the role? And therefore, perhaps that's something we could all be encouraged to do, and certainly for our listeners as well, is just to think about, do they have influence over some of these titles, whatever they may be for. It might be the title for a meeting, it might be the title for a role, and actually thinking about, has it got negative consequences that could be overcome?
Yeah, I think it's really important if you're internal facing and the team understand from where they are today, I want to get there, and that means I'm going to have to go up these steps and I'm going to build my experience and my years of experience over time. But we need to think about the appropriateness of the levelling and the terminology externally is what I would say. I still think it's important to have a differentiation because, someone that's been a programme manager for 20 years, it wouldn't be suitable for them to have a project manager job title. No. So we have to differentiate, but it's about thinking about diversity, making people feel included, that there is an appropriateness to the job titles that we create.
And there's also, I think, on that aspect as well, is you don't want to standardise so much that actually it doesn't mean anything in the marketplace. Because let's face it, I'd love all of my fantastic talent to stay working with us at RAPP, but that's not real world. And if we end up giving them some quirky, strange title just because it suits us, then if they go to look for another job and they say, I'm head of the circus, it means nothing. So I think you do need to have some terminology of titles that matches with the market as well as recognises.
I think that is the beauty of slightly diverting the topic, but I do think that is the beauty of the project management arena. I think skills are really transferable into different places, and I'd like to think that people who are in the career of project management, they can go from one place to another, and it's not a bad thing to move from one place to another, because actually you're learning in a different environment. So I started in telecoms, I moved to retail, I'm now in telecoms but in the network space, whereas previously I was in the IT space. But fundamentally, the grounding that I've got has all been in project management. I've just been doing it in different areas. And I think it's important for people to see that you don't have to just stick to one thing because your role is so broad and varied. You can adapt to different places.
I think that adds benefit as well. I mean, we're very fortunate. I could name probably at least 10 people that have boomeranged back twice, if not 3 times. And you think that's amazing, because actually we get the benefit of the experience that they've had in that other sector or that other provider.
Absolutely, and I think diversity in that context actually provides growth, because I think as a project manager, you don't need to be the technical expert. We've established that. You can come from a range of different backgrounds. What you need to be is adaptable. You need to be able to look at an environment and understand what in it is going to be important, and then manage that project within that context.
There's another book, Sandy, called Our Iceberg is Melting. And this is all about basically being able to learn how to change and succeed in different conditions. So, you know, one place of work, it might be really structured. Another place of work, it might be really disorganized. So how do you, doing your project management role, adapt to those different scenarios and environments? So I highly recommend that. Project managers will like it, because project managers like being organised, and this is about living in a land of chaos and how do you adapt to that, and Our Iceberg is Melting definitely addresses some of those things.
Fantastic. I think these are great titles. Sorry, Carolyn.
No, I was just that just sprung something to mind for me, which is quite often, because the project manager is at the core of delivering a project or a programme, they struggle with the downsides. You know, they're quite often the ones that are sorting out the problem or the risks, and you can end a day thinking, I've achieved nothing. It's been chaos. It's negative, and I quite often say to people, there are always highlights in the day, and even if it's the last couple of minutes before you go to sleep, if you do a what went well today moment, you will re-energise your whole brain, your whole psyche. You'll approach the next day in a more positive way. And it's just simple things, like it could just be the project's going down the pan at the moment, so I'm upset about that, but I had my favourite lunch in the canteen today, or I didn't get stuck in traffic. You know, all of those things add up as well, because we do need to have self-compassion for ourselves to make sure that we can meet the next day in a positive way.
Absolutely, and in fact that brings us perhaps nicely on to actually, well, if we've started to expel some of the myths that exist when we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, how can we exploit some of the opportunities? And perhaps one way into that subject is to think about how important is emotional intelligence, because I think for us to create these safe spaces, for us to embrace diversity, it perhaps starts with the self and our need to develop our own emotional intelligence. What would be your thoughts around that, Carolyn?
I think we have to be very cognizant of how we are. In the role that I'm in, I'm quite often having to speak to more senior team leads about their parent-child attitude or their command and control attitude. I realise ultimately the buck stops with them, but that's not nurturing enough. I'm not asking them not to deliver bad news, but if you do it in such an undermining way, you're not going to have a team that's going to go to the moon and back for you. So I quite often say to people, you need to, going back to what I said earlier on, think about what's going on in their life that might mean that they're not delivering very well, or maybe it's something you haven't done. I had a perfect example this week where I had someone that I'd done a one-to-one with who had said, I've just been promoted up a level, but I still feel like I'm doing my old job, but I don't really know what my new job is. So then I had to go to the program lead and say, have you actually done here's your role and remit of what you should be letting go and what you should be doing? No, why should I? I went, well, how do you expect that person to step up into that role if you don't? Oh, that's a really good point. And then it got them thinking about, actually, they hadn't had that from their boss. And you think, well, this is, we're not going to have the best operating people if we're not leading by example.
Yeah, and I think linked to that is if I, as a leader, am not telling the team what our goals are and what good looks like and what's success for the team and delivery and how many projects should we be delivering a month or something, then everyone's not clear on what's expected of them. And I think if we communicate really clearly to the team about how to do something and go above and beyond, and how you get all the team to work together, that makes them feel like they're really clear on how to do their role. Similar to your example, if the person hasn't been explained to what the step up is, how will they be successful? Have we explained to them what good is at a more senior level to what good is at the role that they were in previously? And I think that will, if they're told that, then that will enable them to grow and they'll identify their development needs and things. But I also think we have as leaders, we have a level of responsibility to make sure that we are helping. I think we should never just leave people to just get on and do their jobs on their own, because that's not fair and that doesn't feel like it's being one team. So I think it's really important that I reach out to people to go, do you know how to do something? Are you really clear? Does anyone need any help? If you don't offer help, people might be too afraid to ask for help.
And I think this is very relevant in this space, isn't it? Because I think it's not something just happens, diversity and inclusion and equity. It requires education. I remember reading a book long ago, I think Tom Peters promoted to a level of incompetence, and about that notion of, if you don't tell someone where you're trying to head to, and you don't support them in getting there, then don't just expect it to happen, because what you'll get is something different. So obviously education and training has a role to play in ensuring there's understanding of what diversity, inclusion, equity means, and how it can help us. What kinds of initiatives can people take? What would you recommend based on your experience, Carolyn?
What, to improve their education, their awareness?
Yeah, around this topic.
Well, I would always urge anybody to go out and seek and look themselves, because that's a great way of doing it. Within RAPP, as I said earlier on, we have sessions, a bit like Anna was saying, she does lunch and learns. We do some things, for example, we do round tables where we'll discuss a topic, people can come. We'll do a panel. We've got one coming up for recognising International Men's Day, actually, which, quite often we talked earlier on about people feeling inclusive. We recognise International Women's Day. We do Pride. It's like, how do we actually make sure we're not excluding our men as well? But we've got a really good panel, and we're going to use socioeconomic as our theme, because that for me is another thing that's very close to my heart. Is we tend to forget cost of living, we talked about earlier on as well in our chat over lunch, which was times are tough out there now. Coming back to that equity point, are people at leadership level really understanding the pressure points that our younger generations, where there may be 5 people living in a shared flat or shared house, and they came out of COVID and they don't really know how to work in an office environment, but they've got all of those bills, and have they had a pay increase? And all of those things are really important for us to take on board when we're educating and building awareness. We do something called Curiosity Labs, where anybody in the business, doesn't matter what level you are, can stand up and talk about something that could be very close to your heart, could be your hobby, could be your job. But again, it's about sharing your lived experience. We had an amazing, one of our data analyst who is neurodivergent, did a session. She actually did 2 sessions, a phase 1 and a phase 2, because she wanted to explain to people how she'd got her diagnosis, the pain that her and her family had gone through to do that, how she struggled to get a permanent role, but then that was all based on how people didn't know how to respond to her, a bit like your situation with your young lady who's deaf. It was like, oh, too much of a difficult problem, we don't want to bring you into the business. But she's become so much more confident about being able to talk about that, that's made other people think, oh, right, I have to change too. So I think it's that education, it's getting people to talk about their lived experiences if they feel comfortable, because I do have a belief that just because you happen to be in one of these underrepresented groups, it's not your problem to solve.
No.
But if you've lived an experience that you want to share and tell us what, if we're on the outside of that, what we can do and how we can then come up with solutions, I think that's a really good balance. It's not up to them to solve the problem that others find themselves in.
And I think that topic alone, again, highly connected to the one we're talking about today in terms of neurodiversity as a set. And in fact, it's going to be the subject of one of our future webinars for that very reason, because it is compelling. And as you rightly say, it's not about for the individuals to solve that problem. It's for us to collectively come together and understand the problem so that we can support and create the right environments in which all people can flourish. So a wonderful point there. So leading on from that thought, because we've touched on the fact that there can be all these different groups, things like, you know, whether it's celebrating pride, whether it's celebrating neurodiversity, etc. And there's a lot of Fortune 500 companies have ERGs, employee resource groups, led by minority groups to kind of create awareness and enthusiasm. What from your experience, are some of the upsides and downsides of doing that, and what would you encourage people to think about if they're thinking about setting up employee resource groups to try and transcend some of the barriers that exist?
I think ERGs are an immense benefit to the business. I have personal beliefs that some corporates do it because it looks good for the corporate, and I worry that maybe some ERGs in big corporates are censored because they maybe have a senior lead on them from the SLT that may not be from that group. That said, everybody is on that journey. It's good that something is being done rather than nothing. What I fear is that because we have these individual ERGs, it's siloing those individual groups. You've got the LGBTQ+, you've got disability, you've got parents and carers. Great, but where's the intersectionality? Because I've not met one person yet that probably isn't a combination of 1 or 2 or 3 of those things. I think that's what we need to work harder at. And does that mean that you don't have individual groups and you have more of a collective and more of a community or a neighbourhood? That might be a better way forward. We're trialling different things at RAPP. We've put more governance in this year. We've allowed individual ERGs to stand. I know that we're going to do something, we're going to evolve that next year. We've got to try things in order that it's better for everybody moving forward.
Absolutely, and perhaps that's an advantage maybe sometimes in a smaller company, Anna, that, you know, maybe sometimes there's a danger in a big corporation we can end up becoming a bit mechanistic in the way we treat and actually creating polarisation without intention. What's the advantage in a smaller organisation, do you think?
So we don't have those groups, and I think things just happen naturally. So if there's a Diwali festival or something, or even someone in the team recently is due to go off and have a baby, and we did a baby shower for her. Now the baby shower was not just a whole load of females in a room sticking the dummy on the baby. It was a really inclusive thing for all the team members, and we just did that because we wanted to do it and have fun as a team. So I think by being a small company, we're a bit more flexible about being able to adapt and do things at the right time, depending on, you know, what time of year it is or who's involved. And I think the other thing is that there is no restriction. You don't have to be on the senior management team to come up with an idea for doing something. It is open to all for everyone to put suggestions forward. sort of unrelated to diversity inclusion, but because it was happening at the time in May, we did a coronation tea, and we included everyone in that, and that was just a fun thing to do, to get people together, relevant to the thing that was happening in May, but actually it was about just getting people together and eating a lot of cake.
And I guess that's actually a really important point underlying all of this. One of the values of diversity, or paying attention to diversity, inclusion and equity, is it creates environments in which people want to work, and it creates opportunities to come together and to talk. And in fact, even in the project management sphere, I'm aware a number of PMOs are also taking on that role of actually helping to celebrate across projects, maybe national festivals or important days. And that's something we could do more of, don't you think?
Absolutely, we could, and I echo what Anna says. It shouldn't just be top down. Everybody should be able to come forward with an idea. We've run some different drives recently. There was a back to school drive where everyone was able to bring in maybe your standard uniform that their kids are, because let's face it, kids grow out of clothes so quickly, bring them in and then let other parents take them away. We're going to do something like that at Christmas, like we did last Christmas, where you could bring in toys that maybe had hardly been used and could be then shared. I think all of those things help build a sense of belonging and a community. And unless they're absolutely going to upset another group, then people should be allowed to have their empowerment. I think one thing I might add when you said about watch outs is, and I don't think we're perfect by any sense of the imagination, is that I think some corporates do tend to think that if we're going to do DE&I and we're going to have ERG, you should do it in your own time, it's off the side of your desk. And that I don't think is necessarily the right way to do it either, because if it's as important to the business delivery that we have diverse teams, that we celebrate everybody, then we should find time in the working week to actually give that time to those individuals that are creating those events and those activities. That's a work in progress for us at the moment.
And a really, really important point. I think
we've got teams in different locations, and there's one team last year we organised this, and the PMO are actually organising it this year. We're doing a Christmas picnic in the office in December. Now it's called Christmas, but actually what we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage everyone from lots of different cultures to bring in different foods. So everyone's bringing in a different plate of food, whether it's cheese and biscuits, or if it's from some baklava or some Greek meatballs or something. And that's about, it's really fundamentally about including everybody, and having a good time. And that is not outside of office hours. We're purposefully doing it over an extended lunch period to make sure that everyone can come and people don't have to rush off to go and pick their children up from nursery or whatever.
And I think that's a really important message, is if organisations are going to take these topics seriously and really see them as forming the future, then it has to be within the workplace. Otherwise, by definition, we're potentially not enabling some people to be a part of things because of other commitments,
We're not being inclusive.
Exactly.
Sorry, I need to sort of course correct what I was saying. It's not that the events happen out of the working time, it's just that you're expected to. I think a lot of organisations say, well, I expect you to do that thinking over lunchtime.
Yes.
Not do it. We haven't said on a Wednesday morning you've got between 10 and 11 to go and do your council meeting or your ERG meeting. What that did trigger, though, you saying we didn't call it a Christmas picnic, it's a seasonal picnic or a festive picnic, is I think one of the other things we're going to start to see more of, and my sister works in the civil service and she works in Cambridgeshire, and I was really amazed when she came home and she said, we've just had announced that basically if you are not of a Christian faith and you don't want to acknowledge like bank holidays and the Christmas holiday as such, you can choose to work those and take off your faith day, and it doesn't have to come out of your holiday, which I thought was really progressive, and I'd really like to look at that within RAPP, because I think then that really does start to say we're being inclusive, we acknowledge that you want to celebrate Hanukkah, but you don't want to take that as holiday, but therefore you might not take May bank holiday. And we find a way of accommodating.
That's a great
And
point.
at the end of the day, if the civil service can do it, then surely the rest of us could probably find a way of doing it.
Absolutely. I can't believe how quickly this conversation has gone this afternoon. So many interesting points come up about expelling myths and exploiting opportunities. So before we wrap up today, well, pardon the pun, before we wrap up, Carolyn, I'm going to come to you first and say, what would be, if we've engaged people today and they're excited about saying, I want to be able to do something, or a personal action I can take now, what would be a recommend you would give so that they can start on their journey or develop their journey in this topic?
So I've given a couple of tips along the way. So my additional two would be, there's a podcast stroke shortcast that is run by a guy called Eric Fisher. It's called Beyond the To-Do List, and it's those short excerpts of how can you learn to build boundaries, improve your communications. So that's a really good one. And then the other one is something that I'm on a learning journey for at the moment, and that is to look up the work by Stuart Hall, Jamaican British cultural theorist. Back in the 70s, he is an amazing man, and just looking at his thought process on cultural theory and how he changes his vocabulary over that time and gets you to think outside the box and makes us realise all the traps that we've put ourselves in from our vocabulary, the way we work and the constructs and the working class system. If you really want to get into the deep stuff, go and look him up. He is amazing.
Sounds like a great way forward. And Anna, for you, what would be some parting words today that people can think about to take their journey forward?
I think a couple of things. I think we've talked about it already today, but I think it is so important to talk to your colleagues, talk to your team members, talk to your friends, because if you're stuck on something, or you don't agree with something, or something's bugging you, a problem shared is always a problem halved. And I think the more people that talk to each other, the more we can get rid of this sort of stigma and really work through it together. So that would be one, talk to your colleagues. The other one is there's this great book, because a lot of people feel like they can't do something, or they're afraid. Imposter syndrome, we've not particularly talked about it today, but I think that is a real thing, particularly if we're in an environment or a culture which we're not familiar with. That could develop people's fears even more. And there's this really good book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers, and I highly recommend that.
Fantastic. Well, great recommends from you both, and thank you so much for taking part in today's discussion, and lots for us to think about there. Thank you as well to all the people that have dialed in. It's been a fabulous turnout today, and for all the questions that have come forward over the course of the last hour. We will be having our next webinar in February, and you'll be able to find out more details of that either via our website, which is www.provek.co.uk, or indeed via LinkedIn, where we'll promote these sessions as well. In the meantime, if you do have any topics you're passionate about, you want to join the debate and you want to see us getting experts in to talk about them, please do feel free to contact us via the contact button on our website, and we'll be happy to take those ideas forward. In the meantime, thanks very much for joining. Thanks again to our viewers, and thank you from me today. Goodbye.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.